G'day, I'm Wendy, and today I'm joined in conversation with Jennifer Hatt, writer, author, and code model coach. Um, Jennifer, I'd actually like you to introduce yourself and let us know what you think we should know about you.
Well, there's a loaded question right there. My name is Jennifer. I have lived my entire life in Nova Scotia, and I love being near the ocean, never more than 10 or 15 minutes away. I feel very privileged. I'm a little bit spoiled with that. And I've made my career working with words. So the cool thing is that has given a lot of opportunity for me to do different things. So I have worked in journalism. I have worked freelance for much of my career, corporate writing, fiction. I've written 4 books and I'm working on a 5th, which is a memoir. I've worked with other authors to help them get their books finished into print. And my overall adventure now is living life from a quantum paradigm through the WEL-Systems body of knowledge and as a code model coach.
Thank you for that. I love that word adventure. I think life is an adventure. And I think for too long, I didn't realize that. And I love also that you live so close to the ocean. I am a native Nova Scotian, but I've been living in the Montreal area now for more than 30 years. And the one thing that I miss more than anything else is the sound of the waves.
There is nothing that I found that compares to a beach to appeal to whatever mood I am in. So sometimes it is the sound of the waves ongoing. Sometimes it's the breeze. The breeze you get off the ocean is so very different than anywhere else. And even the feel sometimes for me, it's the sand, the warmth of the sand underneath my feet.
Mm-hmm.
I have done some of my best reflecting, my greatest crying, my highest inspiration on the shores of Nova Scotia or wherever I can find a beach. But I will say, I am biased. I think Nova Scotia beaches are the best.
Oh, that's
Put that
lovely.
out there.
And do you go to the beach 12 months of the year?
I do not. I There's something about seeing ice chunks all over the sand that just depress me more than I am during the average winter. So no, I tend to hibernate as best I can during the cold months. But I do start going probably as soon as the snow is gone.
Okay.
And I have been known to swim right up until Thanksgiving.
Excellent.
So
You know what? Whenever I get a chance to be on the beach, it doesn't matter what time of year I will go, but probably because I don't have the opportunity every day anymore. So even the snow and ice tends not to deter me.
oh, I get that. Yeah, for sure. As I
Okay.
said, I'm spoiled.
That's awesome, though. It really is. So, thank you for chatting with me today. I really appreciate it. I actually started this series because I am so fascinated by the things that we learn along our journeys. And I am starting a program for groups of women called Magic, which is basically kind of a decloaking light in terms of WEL-Systems. Just kind of an introduction to that quantum paradigm and how we can move through our lives differently. And one of the things that fascinates me the most is the fact that we have these aha moments, or what Louise would call green dot moments, where we realize something that we didn't know before. And it's really a game changer or a life changer for us. And I'm curious if you can share maybe a couple of yours.
Yeah, I'd love to. If and when they come to me, I know they're there. The beauty of green dot moments for me is I go, oh, wow, that's cool. And then I immediately start living it as if it was always there. And in a sense, it has been. It's a rediscovery for me as opposed to acquiring something new. And I think that in itself was a huge awareness for me. Owning the fact that I am enough in every moment, I have everything I need in every moment. Um, it sounded too good to be true when I first heard it and when I first started in this exploration
Mhm.
of a quantum realm with a code model perspective. Um, it was counter to everything I had seen and been taught
Mhm.
my entire life. What I had modeled for me and what I had been taught, of course, is like most of us. I mean, you need a greater authority. You need somebody bigger, smarter, more powerful, richer, more educated, more enlightened somehow to tell me how to live my life. And good things will come to me if I just do what I'm told. And there was always that streak in me that thought, no, that doesn't feel quite right. And that was the streak that got me, put in the corner,
Mhm.
sent a lot to my room, shunned on the playground, all kinds of different things. And at the same time, it got me rewards too.
Mhm.
So, which is why when I came to a choice point of, is this really true for me or is it not? Um, there were a lot of layers to reflect on
Mhm.
in terms of where I acquired that pattern in the first place and is it still serving me? And knowing, um, knowing that a breath, a mindful breath to the base of the spine reveals anything you want to know.
Mhm.
That was a huge awareness for me too, and game changing and ongoing. It's taking me years to do that routinely, and I still find sometimes I need to pause and remind myself to do that. But a simple breath um, has been revolutionary in my world for sure. Um,
I like that you use the word rediscovery at the onset of what you've just described for us, because that was something that took me a while to realize. I didn't really understand the layers of habits and beliefs, values, and attitudes that we pile on top of who we authentically are, and how it really has to be stripped away so that we can rediscover the person we are at our core. Um,
Yeah, totally. And for me, not so much stripped away as mindfully released. It's one thing for somebody to come along and point it out to me and, try to take it away,
mhm.
at which point I would probably fight them fiercely for it. Um, the real power is in me seeing it for myself and choosing to go, no, done, goodbye. And that is harder than I thought it would be,
Mhm.
and it's harder than it sounds. Um,
Yes.
I I had to own how comfortable I had become in areas of my life where I was plain making myself miserable,
Mhm.
creating it all because misery had actually become comfortable, far more comfortable than joy.
Well, it becomes familiar, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was in moments frightening for me how I would choose immediately familiar over unknown,
Mhm.
even if that familiar meant squeezing into a space I knew I no longer fit, or being unhappy, or knowing my life was on the other side and not allowing myself uh, space to go after it. And that shows up in the tiniest of things. It can be in allowing myself another piece of chocolate because bloody hell, I want another piece of chocolate. Or it can be in remodeling my own business
Mhm.
the way I want to do it and not the way I've been told a business has to be done. Um, for me, everything now is starting to integrate and it's not code model over here and family over here and paid work up there and freelance work down there.
Mhm.
It's all starting to come together and all be from an internally referenced life. owning that I am, yes, this quantum being. So in that, um, there's all kinds of spaces that are opening up for me to create and play in. At the same time, it's like moving into a new house in a sense, and the previous owner has half moved out and half not. So you're left with the remnants to go, yeah, I'll keep that. Nope, that's gone. That's sometimes how I feel about my life, that I created before, that I still run patterns from,
That's a really
and
cool
the life that
analogy.
I continually am emerging into, breath by breath.
That's a really cool analogy. I found myself personally really challenged over the last 3 months or so, just because of the changes that I've made in my life. And I've been around the WEL-Systems paradigm for about 6 years now. And I thought I'd gotten to a point where I thought, okay, everything is flowing. I got this. And I'm constantly reminded that, it's never one and done, right? It's like an evolution, and sometimes it's two steps forward and one step backwards. I had an extremely challenging summer trying to stay mindful and trying to and constantly reminding myself, no, you don't do that anymore. And taking that breath and saying, okay, what are we going to do today that's different than what I would have done before? And I found it so challenging that for 3 weeks in July, I couldn't stop coughing. My asthma flared up and just would not go away. And it was fascinating to me how old patterns started to run, and how deeply ingrained those are.
They absolutely are. And you're so right, Wendy. It is never one and done. Um, I recently, in early September, engaged in a 5-day decloaking and living authentically experience. So
Mhm.
that's a 5-day immersive program, 5 full days of conversation with very aware and astute and brave women,
Mhm.
willing to go to those dark places, in a reclamation
Mhm.
of who we are authentically as humans and as signals.
Mhm.
And it's a conversation that I had first engaged in 7 years ago. Um, but of course, this time I'm coming into it with more experience and different people, and the revelations continue to be immense. And that was a game changer for me in terms of stepping into this new season of autumn.
Mhm.
Um, so much space opened up as a result of engaging in those conversations and staying in the really dark and icky spots.
Mhm.
And those are just words, those are just constructs. It's all energy at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And that was a huge awareness piece for me. Being able to drop labels of sad, angry, happy, joyful, fearful, excited. Those are all nominalizations.
Mhm.
It's all just how we term energy. And of course, words are laden with, um, like values and conditioning.
Mhm.
Sad is supposed to be bad. We're supposed to avoid that. We're supposed to be afraid of that in a
Mhm.
sense. Oh my goodness, you don't want to ever make anyone cry.
Yeah.
And that's a very old paradigm for me now, but that is one that I had to mindfully choose over and over to step out of and to say no. Energy's energy. And if it presents as heaviness, if it presents as pain, if it presents as elation,
Mhm.
um, great. But it all has information in there for me.
Mhm.
And so to not judge it, but to allow it.
Yeah.
It's all part of who I am, part of what's moving. And there's something in it for me as I continue to evolve. Um, how many of us shut things down because we've been taught to
Absolutely.
fear the sensation? Um, and so that
Avoidance.
was that was huge for me, especially as somebody who works in words, to learn to not attach words to things, and just allow has been a challenge, um, but one that has just lit me up. Um, so Yeah, that is ongoing too. And again, everything creates space and I can feel that. And there's no sensation in the world better than feeling aligned um, and grounded in your truth.
Yes. And you're absolutely right. We tend to avoid things that are uncomfortable. And I've come to learn that when we face those uncomfortable things and strip those labels away and not treat them as good or bad or right or wrong, then we can kind of approach it with a curiosity and like I'll ask myself, where's this coming from? What's going on here? Which I never would have done before. I would have like, found another task to do so I didn't have to think about it. That was the way that I avoided things typically. I was the queen of to-do lists. Like how many if I got, 60 things done today, let's do 61 tomorrow kind of thing. It was like a game. And there's no way that stuff doesn't dissipate. It just compounds and comes back at you harder the next time if you don't deal with it.
Absolutely. It's always there waiting for you, whether or not you choose to allow it or not.
Mhm.
And so true. Curiosity has become my new friend. Whereas for a very long time, I ignored it altogether or learned to push it aside and
Mhm.
go. Sticking with that old adage of curiosity killed the cat.
Yes.
Well, this cat is lit up by curiosity now, um, because it's your gateway
Yeah.
to learning more about yourself, and that has been my greatest challenge of all, is to appreciate me in this world and not make my existence about everyone else, telling everyone else's stories, making sure everyone else is moving along as they should, or
Mhm.
supported, and not mindful of who am I in all of this.
That was a huge one for me too. I grew up believing that my role was a support role for everybody else. And it's a little scary to all of a sudden realize that you're the central character in your own life.
Absolutely. And so what do? We create metaphors for all of that. I mean, my life is case in point. I began my writing career as a paid writing professional in journalism,
Mhm.
where, of course, the more you keep yourself out of the story, the better your story is in
Mhm.
that realm. But then what has happened is created a scenario where I ended up writing 4 books about someone else's life,
Mhm.
leading to a 5th book that is specifically about mine. And that's when it became glaringly apparent to me that I knew way more about someone else than I did about myself. And for there to be any future with me to engage in this person moving forward, I had to be myself. I had to know myself so I could be myself, or else it would be like having a relationship with a ghost.
Yeah.
And I'm mindful that I've recreated those over the years, engaging in what I thought were partnerships
Mhm.
where I was filling both roles because I was partnering with a ghost, and I was in turn doing that to someone else. Um, and in terms of the whole space, the irony is, this spring I moved into what used to be my cottage, and I continue to call it my cottage, but it's me moving from a 3 bedroom or 5 bedroom 3 level home
Mhm.
into a 1 bedroom 1 level cottage.
Mhm.
And so as my inner life expands, my literal housing situation has very much gotten smaller. And I
Interesting.
find that brilliant
Mhm.
because it has really invited my mindfulness in terms of what do I invite into my new home in
Mhm.
terms of furniture and possessions and belongings, and all of those dishes that I think I can't do without, which I currently literally do not have room for right now. What happens to that? And what happens to my life if I choose to let go of that? at the same time as a metaphor for this great expanded life of mine that I am now playing in.
Mhm.
What do I mindfully choose to invite into that, and does it expand me even further, or does it contract me a little bit or slow me down?
Mhm.
um, it's fascinating how we are capable of creating scenarios that just keep bringing back to us things that we really should be paying attention to.
Yeah, and one of the things that I realized was that I really already had everything within me that I needed to have a meaningful life. It has nothing to do with what's going on outside of me or what's in my environment. And like for a couple of years, I lived in a little basement apartment and had like almost nothing that I could call like I could say I was an owner of. And it was incredibly liberating. And I would never have thought in a million years that it worked that way because we think about accumulating stuff, right? We're successful when we have stuff.
Exactly.
And
And it's
it
interesting because I was never one for brand names or yeah, that kind of accumulation or an expensive car. I always loved experiences, so I was happy to live in an older house and drive an older model car if it meant I had money to travel
yeah.
or to otherwise do something fun rather than invest it in a thing. um, but yes, I have become mindful through this whole gradual moving process, um, of how attached I had become to some of my possessions and how dismissive I had become of others. I mean, of course, I have a fairly extensive book collection.
Mhm.
And in my former house, I had books in every room. And I'm now slowly migrating some of those over to this much smaller space.
Mhm.
And I'm finding two things with that. Number one, I'm rediscovering all kinds of books that I had that I love and had completely forgotten about because they were just kind of lost in the pile, lost on the shelf. And at the same time, I have books front and center that I'm looking at, and I haven't read them in 3 years. And I'm thinking, well, if I haven't read them in 3 years, maybe they're not as prized a possession as I thought they once were.
Mhm.
And again, it's been a great invitation for me to apply that to my life in terms of where do I spend my time?
Mhm.
Where do I spend my awareness? And I spend my awareness worrying about small details that suddenly become large the more I obsess about them? Um, and how much is forgotten or lost because I'm constantly diverting my attention to things that are, again, sort of weighty and small and feeding my angst
Mhm.
rather than um, things that light me up.
Interesting. So, do you have anything that you find is your biggest challenge in adopting this way of looking at things? Because you are like you're living it, right?
Yes, I am. I am. Um, I mean, Louise LeBrun puts everything so brilliantly.
Mhm.
But she literally looked at me not long ago and said, "You have a PhD in slithering." I hate snakes, by the way. They're one of my biggest fears.
Oh, me too.
So that's the irony. But she says that because, again, as a wordsmith, as somebody who works in words, I'm an expert storyteller.
Mhm.
So I can weave a story that, and I've been mindful of this for years. And this came to a head when I was trying to write my memoir, and I would write these chapters and I would hand them to people and they would be reading them and completely engrossed, but then get to the end and realize I told them absolutely nothing. I took them on a marvelous journey,
Mhm.
but it didn't lead to anywhere. I
Okay.
didn't connect it back to myself. And so I tell myself stories on a regular basis and very rapidly about just about anything that I really don't, at first breath want to deal with.
Okay.
So as an adept storyteller, I get lost in my own stories, quite literally. And
Okay.
therefore, it's difficult for me to own face or otherwise deal with specifically the core issue that's trying to get my attention. So a lot of my process has been, well, just that, stop and take a breath, because the more I talk, the faster I can talk sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the stories really take root.
And it's when we let our intellect take over.
Yeah,
the stories start to spin, right?
absolutely. And the stories feel so real. It's like those dreams you have when you wake up and you're going, wow, I really thought I was there.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing. Which is why working in a community, not working necessarily, being in a community,
Mm-hmm.
is so important. And those deep dive conversations in the safety and astute company of aware women.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the stories have no place to hide. And that's where, over time and with a lot of practice, um, and with choice,
Yes.
if I hold the intention that I want to live an authentic life, I don't want to live hidden behind stories anymore,
Mm-hmm.
then that, you know, invites myself to come forward and go, okay, stop with the stories.
Yeah.
Feel whatever it is. Yeah.
And those conversations are so very important, as you mentioned. And I noticed myself this summer, like again, not avoiding the conversations, but certainly not going out of my way to have them. I kind of became that human doing again instead of a human being. And that's how I spin stories, by kind of self-isolating myself and not dealing with things. And it was, so kind of, and just to put it in context, like I went back to visit my mother's house this past summer, and she's now in a retirement home, so she can't live by herself anymore. It's the first time I was in my family home by myself for a week, and it brought in all sorts of ghosts. You mentioned ghosts earlier, and it was almost as if I suddenly didn't know who I was anymore. And I spent the last few years nailing that, or so I thought. And it was a real shock to my system to realize that there's some stuff here that I haven't even considered yet that I have to process. And that's the beauty of it, right? So that's where the conversations are so useful, because it's tough to navigate some of this stuff by ourselves. Because by ourselves, we tell ourselves those stories, and stories help us to explain ourselves to ourselves and others, but they also put boundaries around us and tell us who we are. And that's the kind of stuff that has to be broken through, I think.
Well, I mean, the point of a story, at least in my life, is to keep me from touching the reality of the situation. So the story, quite often, is about someone else, or sometimes it's about myself as to who I am, to keep me from really being who I am. It's a misguided tool of protection
Yes.
that evolved again from being at an age where strategies were required to
Mm-hmm.
navigate life until we had the realm to be able to choose for ourselves, and reminding ourselves of that choice, and also to taking ownership of the fact that you and I and everyone else create everything in our own lives. We,
Mm-hmm.
we literally create everything. Um, Again, usually because it's something we need to pay attention to, or
Mm-hmm.
something we're longing to deal with on some level and avoiding on another. Um, and that was huge for me to own that as well, that I'm creating everything. I mean, seriously, the guy who cut me off in traffic, I created that. Well, yeah, actually I did. Maybe not him literally coming out in front of me, but certainly my reaction to it.
Yes. Yeah.
So everything, and I mean, it's happening so often with every moment. A lot of things, times we don't even notice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing that I was doing, and I guess reflecting on green dot moments for me in my writing.
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, as this memoir I've been struggling with. I mean, I wrote 4 books in 5 years, and then I've been 6 years trying to write this one book.
Interesting.
And what I was doing is trying, because I would write it, or I'd write sections of it, and I would read it, and it would just feel wrong. It's like, no, it was like I was two different people. The one who carried the story, and I could feel the story and see it,
Mhm.
and I would sit down to write it, and something very different would come out. And the frustration level was just driving me to not touch it at all.
Okay.
What I was doing was losing myself again in the story. We create from the present. We create from the moment we are in. And again, with the breathing into the base of the spine, that keeps us present where we have the power to create and to choose. I was slipping into the past as I was writing about the past. So instead of writing from the present
Mhm.
through what I know now, grounded where I am now, reflecting on the past as it happened, I was literally there. That same frightened, confused, young, inexperienced, whoever I was in that moment, I was in that moment trying to write my way out rather than being who I am now, reflecting back on the journey and sharing the journey.
Wow, that sounds pretty profound to me.
It was incredibly profound. And I'm like, what?
Wow.
Like literally, my whole world just opened from that. So writing, not only working on my memoir, but all other writing has taken on a whole new level as well. Because now, when I find myself struggling, I realize that I am probably either slipped in the past, depending on if I'm writing in the past, or I've already leaped ahead to the future and I'm churning about the outcome. So I'm predicting, well, if I write this, then they're going to read this and they're going to think this and they're going to do this and they're going to choose this. And I'm already onto that before I finished actually writing.
As opposed to focusing on the creating in the present moment.
Exactly. Creating it in the moment, breath by breath. Now, I mean, not to say that you can't think about the future while you're writing or think about the past, because, of course, if you're telling a story, it's required. It's where your awareness is.
Mhm.
And making sure that you are in the present moment yourself. And I mean, that means you can visit or think about the past or pull to you. I think that's how it was described to me. You attract to you,
Mhm.
the memories or the thoughts that you're writing about or reflecting on.
Mhm.
But I remain grounded in my present moment.
Because the present moment is all any of us has, right?
That's exactly it.
Yeah. And
So it
and
all made perfect sense, but it's just I had no idea that that's what I was actually doing.
and to have an awareness about that is a whole other kettle of fish, right?
Yeah. So again, astute and awakening women, there's nothing more powerful. The only thing more powerful than an awakened and aware woman is a group of awakened, aware women.
Oh, I love that. It's true. It's so true too. And those conversations really are so incredible. Um, and I've gone through a few of them now, just like you have, and I've caught myself from time to time, kind of getting slippery. I like that PhD in slithering because it's because we can sometimes tell ourselves lies, right? Like we avoid in different ways, and for me, it was just sometimes hard to admit that I didn't have all the answers. That was probably one of the biggest things for me because I had to have the answers.
Yeah, that was huge for me too, Wendy. I mean, I think back in school when I was the geeky, gawky, awkward, ugly duckling. Well, people paid attention when I did things well. I nobody wanted me to play baseball with them, but everybody wanted me on their spelling bee team. Um, so for sure, you get that early positive reinforcement
Yeah,
by being the one who has the right answer.
yeah,
Um, it's hard to let that go
absolutely.
when you go
And
through life.
it's so excruciating when we do something that violates that version of ourselves too, right? As we're learning to let things go, like to openly and publicly admit that I don't have the answers here. That was a really big one for me. I had like I would just not talk. I I can't admit that I don't know
Well,
what's
you
going
know,
on.
and most of us, you know, many of us came to work in the corporate environment after
Mhm.
we left our school environment. And, you know, you're hired, you're paid money to literally know the answers or to know what you're doing.
Mhm.
To admit that you don't know, suddenly there's a whole lot of other stories that are attached to that in that particular realm.
Mhm.
Um, so again, it was freeing for me to be able to own that, you know what, I can say, I don't know. And that being my authentic truth trumps everything else. There's nothing, again, more powerful than that. And if my employer doesn't like that, it's like, well, I'm human and this is where I'm at in this moment. And that's all there is. But that has taken a lot of reflection and reframe to.
It amazes me that I've come to realize that it's something that pretty much all of us go through because we've all been raised in family systems where things have been modeled to us by, I think, for the most part, by well-meaning people. This is how you do this and that, but we stop questioning at some point that there might be another way. And to have it pointed out to you that, well, why, as a coach, I try not to use the word why because it tends to put people on the defensive, but what is important about that thought that there's such attachment to it? Like what happens if you just let that go? Because let that go is a tough thing to do. Like and it's only like, but it's so incredibly liberating when
Yes.
it kind of becomes the next it's like, okay, hit me with that again.
Well, it's like any major change in life. I mean, we life is changing. I mean, by, you know, moment by moment, nanosecond by nanosecond. Yet we get to a point in our lives where we just don't want anything to change.
Yes.
We brace against it. And I think it comes back to that fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
Often said, better the devil you know than the devil you don't.
Mhm.
And I now take great issue with that because it's like, no, I know that devil and I want nothing to do with that one. So let's see what else you got.
That's incredibly brave though. It takes some time to get there.
It does. It absolutely does. And yeah, it's, and also too, I'm reflecting on major life changes, and I've gone through this in the last number of years. You know, you end a marriage.
Yeah.
It's not only about the fact that you are no longer married and you and your partner are no longer together in that way.
Yeah.
It's about your friends. All of a sudden, the dynamic changes with friendships. There are people that don't speak to you anymore. There's family that doesn't, you know,
Yeah.
speak to you. There's his family. There's all kinds of yeah, relationships
Yes.
that have been built based on your one relationship that now no longer exists.
Mhm.
So same thing when there's a major change, you know, you leave your workplace, suddenly the dynamic changes between you and all of these people that you once knew and saw every day.
Yes.
um, so with every moment, with every mindful major change, things will fall away, and that's hard
Yeah.
to let go of that.
Because we
uh,
tend to define ourselves by those relationships and by those things that we do, not
mhm,
so much by who we are.
yes.
Um, Similar for me in the last few years, looking at major changes in my life and trying to figure out how to navigate them and what they really mean.
Mhm,
Because we try to assign meaning to everything. Sometimes things
you
just,
do.
sometimes
Yeah,
things
for
don't mean
sure.
what's
And
really.
you know, you look and you go, gosh, we used to have such good times. You know, it'll be really sad to not have that again.
Yeah.
Again, caught in the I guess the illusion
Yeah.
that you can recreate the past.
And
um
framed in loss as opposed
yes,
to the infinite possibilities that lay
that's
before
correct.
us.
That's correct. You know, yeah, you know, two couples that used to always travel together maybe won't travel together anymore.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean they didn't have a good time when they had a good time.
Mhm.
And who knows now what that can become with something new and with one of those couples not constantly at each other's throats.
Yes.
We've all been there. So, so yeah, it's fear. Fear
Yeah.
is a great, you know, paralyzer.
fear of the unknown, especially, I think,
Yeah.
because the conditioning is that we're shooting toward a specific goal, as opposed, like, now what I tend to do is I I target a specific feeling, and that can manifest in any number of ways. It took some time to get used to it, and even now I find myself going back, well, this is what I have to do today because I want this to happen. But if it doesn't happen, something else will happen, and that'll give me another experience, and that's fine. That I think, to be able to embrace life and whatever it brings our way, and to be able to navigate those things is a wondrous thing.
Totally. And it's interesting, Wendy, you had brought up, Nova Scotia and being raised in Nova Scotia,
Yeah.
and what that can mean. And I'm not sure if this is unique to our part of the world. But, I know I was certainly raised in a household where humility, if that's the correct word, was prized among all else, as in, who do you think you are? Um, there was no greater sin that I witnessed in my household than somebody who was considered full of themselves.
Yeah, too big for their britches.
Absolutely, absolutely. And quite often that was somebody who tended to strut, or maybe they were very well dressed or made up, or I'm coming to realize now that I'm looking at it through adult eyes, oftentimes it was confidence. Somebody who presented as highly confident, as highly, I don't care what anybody else thinks.
Yes.
That was considered, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
And that was grounds for dismissal and diminishment. And when you talk about being raised by well-meaning people, absolutely I was. But I was also raised by people who believed that you didn't want a child who was one of those who was out there getting attention and out there too full of herself.
Yeah.
It was better to
Fly under the radar, be
know
small.
your place. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's painful. And it's painful to own, looking back on it as an adult, that of the pattern that set up for me, as I move into adulthood, a pattern that I'm mindfully now just starting to touch and release, which is, again, game changing.
One of those things that I found that translated into was a profound feeling of unworthiness. And I think women are affected by this more than men, probably. But just to have the confidence to go forth and do something different, or do something that feels right for you, because we're thinking, oh, what are people going to think, though? It's that took a long time for me to shake. And even and quite honestly, there's times now when I'm thinking, I can't do that, what we're going to think. Because it's so ingrained.
Our capacity for shame knows no bounds.
Yeah.
And shame is attached to everything. And again, I don't know if it's a Nova Scotia thing because we're very comfortable with fog, but shame to me feels like fog. It dampens everything. It dampens every joy. It dampens every inspiration. I would feel it because I would feel an idea and I go, oh, wow. And then it'd be like, who do you think you are?
What a great analogy, fog.
Yeah. So, and I was finding, and I was bumping into this over and over again. I own my own company. I have people coming to me asking to work with me, and I'm pulling back going, oh, I don't know. And it's like, what's that about? And it traces back to that thing that I would have been told sometime when I was a child. I mean, I remember a few specific incidents, but that was kind of the ongoing pattern of, don't stand out, don't be, don't take that, don't don't be a nuisance, don't. And so how does an adult create and promote and share authentically from herself
Mhm.
when running that story of, who do you think you are?
Yes.
So yeah, that was not only a green dot, I think that was a green mountain or something that just,
It was a much bigger one.
yeah, or like a green brick to the head, because it took a very long time for
Yeah.
me to be able to touch that, because
But isn't it nice to be able to say, this is this is for me in this moment, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about this.
there is no greater freedom.
Yeah.
That is for sure.
Yeah. It actually, I can feel it in my chest. It just takes my breath away to think that, like, when, and I can think of a couple of things that I've done in the last few years that, for maybe for the first time in my life, were just for me. And I wasn't used to operating like that. So it was like, you kind of, you feel like you're learning to walk all over again, right? It's a
Yeah,
whole new world.
that's for sure. And when you are a person, who built an identity on knowing all the answers and getting it right the first time,
Mhm.
it's very hard to admit that you need to learn to walk all over again. Or,
Absolutely.
in my case, learn how to write in a very different way.
Wow. So interesting. So how do you find your writing has changed?
I'm finding it's more direct.
Oh,
It's and it's easier, and I'm happier doing it. I want to do it. Increasingly over the last decade or so, writing became a chore for me, something I
okay.
had to do. My first book that I wrote, that was my first rediscovery of the joy of writing. Like, I literally wrote that book because I just wanted to write it. Um, and then it became, well, an intellectual exercise, and other stories spinning that went unchecked. And so there became a second and a third and a fourth book, each one a little more constricted than the last, until now, then the fifth book. And it was like, oh my God, I've got nothing left. Um, which was a giant lie, because I had all kinds. It was just about me rather than someone else. And I find now I want to do a blog. I'm blogging again,
Mhm.
on average of once a week, once every couple of weeks.
Awesome.
But I feel it. I feel the urge, and before I would feel a constriction, like, oh,
Mhm.
I should write that, and then I go, no, but I gotta like do laundry. I gotta sweep the leaves off the deck.
There's something that has to be done. And you know what? I find something similar. Like, I would do one of these interviews, and then I couldn't post it. I can't, like, what have I got to say? Right? Like,
Exactly.
or
So
it,
now I'm finding that um, connections are happening. So, for example, my latest blog post was about me taking a swim on the beach in September.
Mhm. I've read it.
Ice and cold water, but just such great awareness for me, in letting myself have what I wanted.
Yeah.
And it was a joy to sit down and write that. I loved writing that. And I was excited to share it because I could feel that
Mhm.
it was authentic to me. So that's how my writing has changed, not only for me in the content, in terms of I'm feeling more aligned. Not that I don't have to go back sometimes and go, oh yeah, I glossed over that piece. So I'm getting more clever with myself in the slipperiness, and I'm not wanting to be as slippery. But it's also in my desire to actually give myself the time to write it and to share it. Those are sort of all, those have all been separate elements
Mhm.
that I was bracing all against, which meant, as a writer, not only was I not sharing anything, or not developing any new ideas, I literally wasn't writing.
Okay.
So it's reversing, it's opening up
That's
all of
wonderful.
that. Yeah.
You write beautifully. What's the name of where can we find your blog?
My website is ownyourstorynow.com, and there is a blog post on there. And I am working on getting a subscription box added to it, so that right now There isn't a notification process, but there should be, ideally in the next week or two.
Awesome.
I've got a tech person who is far more adept at that than I am working on that. So yeah, there will be a time when folks can sign up for notifications if they're interested in seeing when new blogs are posted. But all of my existing blogs are on the site.
Okay, awesome. So what's the biggest project that you're excited about right now?
Oh wow. Hmm. Interesting. A big old should came up because it's like it should be my memoir. And it's like, well, I am excited about that.
Mhm.
But I feel part of me feels like I'm still living the last chapter.
Okay, awesome.
But at the same time, as winter approaches, and I will be spending less time outside and at the beach and doing assorted other things, I am excited by the prospect of a winter writing in my new cozy little space.
Oh, lovely.
Um, I am also working on a code model potential workplace engagement
Oh,
process.
awesome.
My workplace is we've engaged in sort of staff level conversations,
Right.
and I am working on uh, potentially what could aid us in raising the conversation. It's just with the knowledge that we are craving different conversations,
Mhm.
and you cannot have a different conversation unless you first have it with yourself.
Absolutely.
So I'm excited because, again, it's a melding of sort of two very large parts of my life
Mhm.
that are still fairly separate. And this is an opportunity for me to live fully from the WEL-Systems paradigm and to actually, incorporate it into the work that I do,
Mhm.
as well as in the exploration that I'm doing. Have it all part of one as the other, just like quantum universe is.
It's aligned.
It
That's
is
all.
them and they are me, right?
Exactly. That's lovely. Well, Jennifer, I really want to say thank you for chatting with me today. I so appreciate it. It's been lovely getting to know you over the last couple of years, and I look forward to meeting and exchanging again in the future.
Well, Wendy, I think this is wonderful. You having this series and allowing us to meet other, aware and exploring women. And this was a tremendous opportunity, and I am honored by the invitation.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We'll talk again soon.
Wonderful. Thanks, Wendy.